The Galactic Council had compiled extensive documentation on every species that reached the stars. Thousands of civilizations, each with their evolutionary quirks and survival mechanisms cataloged in meticulous detail. The Vrex evolved on a world bathed in the light of twin suns, their eyes capable of detecting the faintest shimmer across vast distances. The Kelthrans emerged from deep ocean trenches where bioluminescence painted an eternal twilight, their sensory organs attuned to chemical signatures in ways that seemed almost magical. The Quothari came from a planet with no axial tilt, where one hemisphere remained locked in perpetual day, while the other languished in endless night, and they chose the light, always the light. Every sapient race in known space shared one universal constant, one evolutionary imperative that transcended culture, biology, and origin. They feared the dark. When humanity first broadcast their presence into the cosmos, the Council assumed they understood everything about these newcomers within the first assessment cycle. Humans evolved on a world that rotated, exposing them to predictable periods of darkness. Their star, a stable yellow dwarf, provided consistent illumination for half their planetary rotation. All their historical records, their mythology, their cultural touchstones reinforced the same pattern. Darkness represented danger, the unknown, the realm where predators lurked and rational minds gave way to primal terror. Human children feared the shadows beneath their beds. Their ancestors huddled around fires through the night, keeping the pressing void at bay with dancing flames. Their literature painted darkness as the domain of monsters, demons, and things that whispered in the spaces between stars. The assessment was clear, the conclusion obvious. Humans feared the dark just like everyone else. Perhaps even more than most. The Vrex envoy who presented these findings to the Council spoke with absolute confidence. They had studied humanity for 3 standard cycles, observed their behaviors, analyzed their physiological responses to light deprivation. Human pupils dilated in darkness, their heart rates elevated, their neurochemistry flooded with stress hormones. They built cities that blazed with artificial illumination, banishing every shadow they could. They even had a medical classification for the fear of darkness, acluophobia, acknowledging it as one of the most common phobias across their species. The evidence seemed insurmountable. Humanity would follow the same patterns as every other race that joined the galactic community. They would thrive in the light, retreat from the darkness, and maintain their civilizations within the comfortable boundaries of illumination. The Council filed their report, stamped it with approval, and moved on to other matters. They thought they understood. The Kelthran incursion changed everything. A rogue faction of deep void raiders, operating from the lightless spaces between stars, began striking at Council shipping lanes with devastating efficiency. They attacked without warning, their vessels painted in matter that drank light rather than reflecting it, their weapons designed to disable before their targets even knew they were under assault. The raiders knew the secret every predator understands. Those who fear the dark become helpless within it. Council defense forces, comprised of species that evolved under suns and stars, found themselves paralyzed when confronting an enemy that made darkness their weapon. Standard protocols demanded illumination, required visibility, depended on seeing the threat before engaging. But when the lights went on, the raiders were already gone, melting back into the void like nightmares at dawn. 6 colonies fell. 14 trading convoys vanished. The Council's military strategists ran simulation after simulation, each one ending in unacceptable casualties. They needed a different approach, something radical, something that defied conventional wisdom. They needed someone who wouldn't simply survive in the dark, but could actually fight in it. Someone suggested the humans. The proposal met with immediate resistance. The assessment was clear. Humans feared darkness just as much as any species, perhaps more. Sending them against an enemy that weaponized the void itself seemed not just futile but cruel, sending lambs into the maw of wolves. But Admiral Kesh, a Quothari officer who had served alongside human tactical advisors during the border disputes with the Threenix Confederation, stood before the council and spoke a single sentence that changed everything. "They fear the dark," she said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won knowledge. "But they go into it anyway." The council chamber fell silent. They had never considered the distinction before. Every other species avoided what they feared, built their civilizations as fortresses against their evolutionary terrors. But humans? Humans did something different. Something the galaxy had never quite seen before. They walked straight into what terrified them, and somewhere in that darkness, something else had learned to be afraid. The human delegation arrived aboard a vessel that looked wrong to Galactic eyes. Council ships gleamed with polished hulls and running lights, broadcasting their presence as a declaration of civilized intent. The human destroyer that entered orbit around Council Station Alpha was different. Matte black, absorbing rather than reflecting, marked only by identification codes that appeared in infrared spectrum. When Ambassador Chen stepped off the transport, the assembled council members noted her appearance with barely concealed confusion. No elaborate uniform, no ceremonial decorations, just practical dark clothing and eyes that seemed to catalog every shadow in the reception hall. Kesh met her with the traditional gesture of welcome, extending both hands palm forward in a display of peaceful intention. Chen returned the gesture, but there was something in her slight smile that made the Quothari Admiral wonder what joke she was missing. They would understand soon enough. The briefing took place in the Council's primary strategic center, a magnificent chamber with panoramic displays showing real-time tactical data across 3 sectors. Holographic representations of the Kelthran Raiders' attack patterns floated in the air, each red marker indicating another loss, another failure. The human tactical team stood silent as Council military commanders outlined the situation, their expressions revealing nothing as they absorbed information about an enemy that had brutalized the galaxy's finest. When the presentation concluded, the Vrex fleet coordinator turned to the humans with barely masked skepticism. "We understand your species has experience with night operations on your homeworld," he began, his translator rendering his tone as professionally neutral despite the dismissive harmonics underlying his native speech. "But this is different. This isn't simply operating in planetary darkness. This is void combat, 3-dimensional space warfare in conditions where your visual spectrum becomes meaningless. Perhaps you should reconsider." Captain Williams, leader of the Human Tactical Response Team, stepped forward. She was younger than most council officers, a detail that hadn't escaped notice. "You're absolutely right," she said, and the council members relaxed slightly, relieved that the humans recognized their limitations. Then she continued, "It's not like fighting in the dark on Earth at all. It's easier." The silence that followed carried the weight of profound confusion. The Kelthran liaison, a reformed raider who had provided intelligence to the council, broke it with a sound that the translator struggled to render, something between a laugh and a warning hiss. "You claim operating in total darkness is easier than partial darkness?" His sensory stalks waved in what his species used to indicate disbelief. "You are either lying or insane." Williams met his gaze without flinching. "Neither. Just better prepared than you realized. Your assessment of humanity was thorough in many ways. You documented our fear, our stress responses, our physiological reactions to darkness. All accurate. But you made one critical error." She gestured, and a human technician activated their own holographic display. "You assumed fear meant weakness. You assumed because we were afraid, we would avoid the dark. You didn't consider what we actually did with that fear." The hologram showed Earth at night, but not the glittering city lights the Council had seen in tourism broadcasts. This was different. Infrared imaging revealed human military units moving through complete darkness, their actions coordinated with precision that should have been impossible without visible light. Thermal signatures showed them navigating obstacle courses, engaging targets, executing complex maneuvers in conditions that would leave most Council species disoriented and helpless. "We're afraid of the dark," Williams continued, her voice carrying an edge now, something that made the assembled officers lean forward despite themselves. "We've been afraid of it since our ancestors huddled in caves while predators circled outside. But being afraid never stopped us. We went into the dark anyway because we had to. Because the dark held things we needed, threats we had to face, spaces we refused to surrender. And over tens of thousands of years, we learned something that apparently no other species did. We learned to hunt in it." The display shifted, showing human soldiers equipped with night vision systems, thermal imaging, motion sensors, technologies built specifically to turn darkness from a disadvantage into a weapon. "Every child's nightmare about monsters in the dark," Williams said. "We grew up and became the things nightmares fear. We took our terror and weaponized it, turned our weaknesses into strengths because we refused to let fear stop us from going where we needed to go." "You want to know how we'll fight the Kelthran Raiders in the void? The same way we've fought every battle in human history that mattered. Afraid, determined, and absolutely unwilling to let darkness be anyone's weapon but ours." The Council chamber remained silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. They were beginning to understand that their assessment of humanity had missed something crucial, something that couldn't be captured in physiological data or cultural analysis. Humans weren't simply a species that happened to function in darkness despite their fear. They were a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history proving that fear was just the first step, never the final answer. The first human patrol entered the contested zone 3 cycles later. The Council's monitoring stations tracked their progress with instruments calibrated to detect the minute energy signatures that betrayed movement in the void. By conventional measures, the human ships should have been blazing beacons, running lights, and communication arrays broadcasting their positions to any hostile sensor within range. Instead, the monitoring technicians found themselves squinting at their displays, uncertain whether the faint returns they were seeing were actual vessels or simply background noise. The humans had gone dark in ways that made even the Kelthran Raiders' stealth techniques look crude. No active sensors, no unnecessary emissions, just cold metal drifting through space like debris, invisible until they wanted to be seen. Admiral Kesh watched from Council Station Alpha's command center, remembering her own experiences with human tactical thinking during the Threenix crisis. She had learned then that humans approach warfare differently than other species, treating conventional wisdom as a starting point rather than absolute truth. Now, as she observed the patrol disappearing into the void where 3 Council battle groups had been decimated, she found herself hoping that unconventional thinking would be enough. The Kelthran Raiders struck exactly as predicted, their attack pattern following the same methodology that had proven devastatingly effective. They approached from multiple vectors simultaneously, their vessels' light-absorbing hulls making visual detection impossible until they were already firing. Disabling shots first, precise energy beams that fried sensor arrays and left their targets blind and helpless before the killing blow. Council analysts estimated the human patrol had approximately 47 seconds before total system failure. They lasted 12 seconds before going completely dark, every system offline, drifting powerless in the black. The Raiders moved in for the kill, confident and casual, following the pattern that had never failed them. The monitoring stations registered the Raiders closing to optimal firing range, preparing to administer the final strikes that would add 3 more human vessels to their tally. Then the humans stopped drifting. Later, when Council intelligence reviewed the engagement data, they would struggle to piece together what exactly happened in those next few minutes. The raiders' own sensor log showed impossible things, contradictory readings that suggested their targets were simultaneously in multiple locations. The human vessels had gone dark, yes, but not disabled. They had shut down deliberately, become ghosts in the void, and while the raiders approached what they thought were helpless prey, the humans had been moving, repositioning, setting up firing solutions with passive sensors that didn't betray their positions. The first raider to die never knew what killed it. One moment, it was lining up its killing shot, the next its hull was rupturing from precise strikes that originated from vectors its tactical computer insisted were empty space. The second raider tried to illuminate the battlefield, flooding the area with active sensor sweeps and high-intensity light. It was a sound tactical decision against any normal opponent. Against humans who had spent millennia refining night fighting techniques, it was suicide. The light gave away the raiders' positions while revealing nothing about the humans, who had already moved again, their vessels painted in materials that drank illumination and gave back nothing but sensor ghosts. The third raider attempted to run, pouring all available power into its engines and fleeing into the deeper dark. It made it nearly 3,000 kilometers before kinetic rounds, launched from the blackness at velocities that made them effectively invisible until impact tore through its drive section. No explosions, no dramatic fireworks, just sudden, surgical violence that left wreckage tumbling through space, while the human ships remained shadows within shadows, invisible predators that had turned the raiders' own tactics against them with devastating efficiency. When the human patrol returned to Council Station Alpha, their vessel's hulls scored and burned but intact, the reception they received was markedly different from their departure. The Council military observers, who had been skeptical, now studied the humans with something approaching awe. The engagement data showed tactics that shouldn't work, strategies that violated conventional doctrine, and results that spoke louder than any theoretical objection. Captain Williams stepped off her ship to find Admiral Kesh waiting, the Quothari officer's expression unreadable by human standards, but her posture suggesting profound respect. "You fought in complete darkness," Kesh said, her translator rendering the statement as a question despite the declarative syntax. Williams shook her head slightly. "We fought in their darkness," she corrected. "There's a difference." They chose the void because they thought it gave them an advantage, because every species they'd encountered feared it enough to become helpless in it. They didn't realize that darkness isn't absolute. It's just the absence of light you're looking for. She gestured toward her ship, where technicians were already beginning repairs. "We've been hunting in the dark since before we had language, tracking prey by sound and scent, and the feeling of movement in the air. Building tools that let us see in wavelengths our eyes never evolved to detect. The Kelthran think darkness is their weapon. For us, it's just another environment, another place where humans refuse to be prey." The Council Intelligence Division spent the next cycle analyzing every microsecond of the engagement, trying to understand how the humans had achieved what seemed impossible. They found layered systems, redundant backups, tactical approaches that assumed darkness rather than fearing it. But more than the technology, more than the specific techniques, they found a mindset that was fundamentally alien to galactic thinking. Every Council species had evolved their warfare doctrine around the same principle: establish overwhelming superiority, maintain absolute awareness, never surrender the advantage of visibility. Humans had built their entire tactical philosophy around the opposite assumption. Assume you're blind. Assume you're outgunned. Assume the darkness is absolute. Then win anyway. It wasn't just about technology or training. It was about refusing to let the worst-case scenario be the end of the story. The Council had thought they understood humanity's relationship with darkness when they documented fear responses and cultural artifacts. They had seen the surface, the evolutionary legacy of prey animals, who huddled in caves while predators prowled. But they had missed the transformation, the moment when humanity stopped being prey and became something else. Something that walked into the dark not despite the fear but because of it, because they had learned that on the other side of terror lay victory, and the only way to reach it was to keep moving forward even when every instinct screamed to run back toward the light. The Kelthran Raiders regrouped after their initial mission, analyzing what had gone wrong, adapting their strategies. They were experienced predators, survivors, who had carved out their domain in the spaces between stars through ruthlessness and tactical excellence. One loss meant little. They would study their enemy, identify weaknesses, and strike again with improved methodology. The Raider Collective's War Council met in their mobile fortress, a massive structure that drifted through the void on a trajectory calculated to avoid all standard patrol routes. Their commanders spread the engagement data across holographic displays, examining the humans' movements with professional interest. The consensus emerged quickly. The humans had surprised them, employed unexpected techniques, but ultimately they were still operating within known parameters. Better sensors, superior coordination, unconventional tactics, none of these represented fundamental threats. The Raiders had encountered skilled opponents before and adapted. They would simply need to be more careful, more thorough. They increased their deployment numbers, ensured overlapping fields of fire, established fallback positions, and predetermined escape vectors. When they struck at the next human patrol, it would be with overwhelming force that left no room for tricks or clever maneuvering. They were confident. They were prepared. They were about to learn the difference between fighting in the dark and fighting humans in the dark. The second engagement began according to the Raiders' revised plan. They positioned 18 vessels in a formation designed to create interlocking kill zones, eliminating the blind spots that had allowed the humans to maneuver effectively during the first battle. They employed active jamming to disrupt the passive sensors they suspected the humans were using. They even brought specialized weapons designed to flood the battlefield with radiation across multiple spectrums, turning the void into a sensory nightmare that should blind everyone equally. The human patrol consisted of 5 ships, outnumbered and apparently outmaneuvered. The Raiders initiated their attack with textbook precision, executing their enhanced strategy with the confidence of predators who had identified and corrected their previous mistakes. For approximately 90 seconds, everything went exactly according to their plan. Then the humans stopped playing defense. The 5 patrol ships that the Raiders had been tracking suddenly weren't there anymore. Not destroyed, not disabled, simply gone. In their place, the Raiders' sensors started detecting returns from everywhere, dozens of contacts appearing across their entire engagement sphere. Some signatures matched human vessels, others were smaller, faster, moving in patterns that suggested autonomous drones or deployed weapons platforms. The Raiders' tactical computers struggled to process the data flood, trying to differentiate between real threats and decoys, between active enemies and sensor ghosts. While they hesitated, trying to identify priority targets, the actual attack came from vectors they had assumed were secure, supposedly empty space that erupted with precisely targeted fire that began systematically dismantling their formation. The human doctrine, Council intelligence analysts would later learn, didn't rely on stealth alone. The darkness wasn't simply a place to hide. It was a 3-dimensional battlefield where perception itself became a weapon. The 5 patrol ships had deployed clouds of reflective chaff, thermal decoys, and electronic warfare packages, while simultaneously going cold and repositioning. The Raiders found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, their sensors feeding them information that was simultaneously accurate and completely misleading. Every shot they took revealed their position without illuminating their targets. Every active scan gave away their tactical state without providing useful targeting data. They were drowning in information while remaining fundamentally blind, and in that confusion, the humans were dismantling them with methodical precision. One by one, the raider vessels began dying, not from overwhelming firepower, but from accumulated damage delivered by an enemy they couldn't pin down, couldn't predict, couldn't counter. The raiders tried to retreat, attempted to break contact and regroup, but the humans had anticipated that too. Mines seeded throughout the engagement zone activated as the raiders fled, not powerful enough to destroy the fleeing vessels outright, but sufficient to slow them, damage their drives, leave them vulnerable for the follow-up strikes that came moments later from the darkness they were trying to reach. When the battle ended, 11 raider vessels were destroyed outright, 5 more were crippled and adrift, their crews abandoning ship and broadcasting surrender codes. The remaining 2 managed to escape, limping away with damage that would take months to repair. The human patrol, all 5 ships intact despite superficial damage, began the methodical process of securing prisoners and salvaging intelligence from the derelicts. Captain Williams transmitted her after-action report to Council Station Alpha with the same professional detachment she might use to describe a routine training exercise. The casualties inflicted, tactics employed, lessons learned, all documented in precise military language that somehow made the lopsided victory seem inevitable rather than extraordinary. But embedded in that report was a single line that captured something the official language couldn't quite express. Enemy adapted to fight in the dark. We adapted to make the dark fight for us. Admiral Kesh read that line 3 times, each time understanding it more deeply. The raiders had treated darkness as a tool, something to be exploited for tactical advantage. Humans treated it as an environment, something to be mastered and controlled and turned into an extension of their will. It was the difference between using shadows to hide and becoming the shadow itself. The word spread through the Kelthran raider network with the speed of existential terror. The collective that had terrorized Council space for cycles, that had built their reputation on being apex predators in the void's darkness, discovered what prey animals learn eventually. There's always a bigger hunter. Some raider groups chose to relocate, moving their operations to distant sectors where humans weren't deployed. Others attempted to adapt, developing new technologies and tactics designed specifically to counter human night fighting capabilities. A few, driven by pride or stupidity or simple desperation, continued to operate in contested space, convinced that they could find an edge, exploit a weakness, prove that the humans' victories were flukes. They were all wrong. Every engagement followed the same pattern, with variations in scale but never in outcome. The raiders would set their trap, employ their darkness, attempt to leverage the void's concealment, and the humans would turn that darkness against them, transforming the battlefield into a nightmare space where every shadow held death and every moment of confident predation became a last mistake. The body count rose. The survivor stories became more desperate, more terrified. And slowly, the fundamental understanding shifted. The Kelthran raiders, who had built their entire culture around being the things that hunted in the darkness between stars, learned to fear the dark themselves. Because now, when they drifted through those lightless spaces, they knew something was watching them. Something that had evolved in the dark. Something that called those shadows home. The war ended not with a grand battle, but with a quiet dissolution. The Kelthran raider collectives, once proud and feared across 3 sectors, began to fragment as survivors circulated their stories. The Council's diplomatic corps, sensing opportunity, reached out to the various raider factions with offers of amnesty and integration. Many accepted, choosing the uncertainty of reform over the certainty of encountering humans in the dark. The few who refused, who clung to their old ways and their old territories, found themselves hunted with systematic efficiency. Human tactical groups mapped every hiding spot, every supply cache, every secret route through the void. They moved through the darkness like an inevitable tide, patient and thorough and absolutely relentless. Within 2 standard cycles, the Kelthran incursion was effectively over, not because the raiders had been defeated in open battle but because they had learned a lesson that every Earth predator knows. When something higher on the food chain enters your territory, you either adapt, submit, or die. The few remaining raider holdouts chose adaptation. Emerging from the darkness, they had once ruled to surrender to the Council forces waiting in the light. They looked like broken things, these once proud hunters, their confidence shattered by encountering prey that refused to be prey. The victory celebration at Council Station Alpha was subdued by galactic standards. No grand parade, no triumphant speeches, just a formal ceremony acknowledging the human force's contribution to restoring security in Council space. Admiral Kesh presented Captain Williams with a commendation crystal, the traditional symbol of the Council's highest military honor. Williams accepted it with grace, but Kesh noticed the human officer's attention kept drifting to the observation ports, to the darkness beyond the station's hull. "You're not comfortable here," the Quothari admiral observed. "In the light." Williams smiled slightly, the expression containing something that Kesh was learning to recognize as human irony. "We appreciate the light," she said carefully. "We build our civilizations in it, raise our children under sunny skies, celebrate when dawn breaks after long nights. But comfortable? No. We learned a long time ago that comfortable is dangerous. Comfortable is what gets you killed when the darkness comes, and the darkness always comes eventually." She turned to face Kesh fully. "Every species in the Council evolved on worlds with night and day. But most of you retreated from the night, built your societies around avoiding it, treating darkness as something to be overcome or endured. Humans couldn't do that. Our world, our evolution, our history, none of it gave us that luxury. We had to go into the darkness, whether we wanted to or not. Hunt in it. Fight in it. Live in it. And somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing it as the enemy and started seeing it as just another place where humans exist." The Council's strategic assessment team spent months analyzing the human tactical doctrine, attempting to understand the principles that made it effective. They published reports and white papers, held seminars and training exercises, trying to distill the humans' approach into something that could be taught to Council forces. But they struggled with a fundamental disconnect. Council warfare assumed optimal conditions and attempted to create them. Establish superiority, maintain awareness, control the battlefield. Human warfare assumed the worst possible conditions and built victory on that foundation. You're blind, outgunned, fighting in chaos and darkness, now win anyway. It wasn't just different tactics or better technology. It was a completely inverted philosophical approach to conflict itself. The Council fought to create advantages. Humans fought assuming they had none, and then created advantages from that assumed disadvantage. They turned weakness into strength, fear into fuel, darkness into home territory. And once the analysts understood that, they began to understand something deeper about humanity's place in the galactic community. These were not simply another species that happened to be useful in certain tactical situations. These were beings who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to thrive in exactly the conditions that terrified everyone else. The things that went bump in the night? Humans were the things that bumped back harder. 6 cycles after the Kelthran incursion ended, the Council formally established the Night Watch, a specialized force comprised primarily of human personnel with support from other species willing to learn their methods. Their mandate was simple: patrol the dark spaces, the void between stars where law and light struggled to reach. They became the Council's answer to anyone who thought darkness provided immunity from justice or safety from consequences. Pirates, raiders, rogue colonies, territorial warlords, all the entities that had previously exploited the void's vastness to operate beyond Council authority, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that hunted better than they hid. The Night Watch became legend across civilized space, their reputation growing with each successful operation. They were the shadow that hid shadows, the silence that broke silence, the thing that made predators check behind them before sleeping. And at the heart of that legend was the simple truth that had reshaped galactic understanding. Humans feared the dark just like everyone else, but they went into it anyway. They had learned 10,000 years ago that fear was just an emotion, not a barrier. That courage wasn't the absence of terror, but the decision to move forward despite it. That the darkness held power only over those who surrendered to it. Every human child still feared the monster under the bed. But every human child also grew up learning that when you turn on the light, the monster disappears. And when the light isn't available, when you're stuck in the dark with something dangerous, then you become the thing that makes monsters disappear. Captain Williams, eventually promoted to lead the Night Watch, gave only one interview about her service. The Vrex journalist, the same one whose original assessment had declared humans to be standard variant light-dependent species, asked what she wanted people to understand about human nature. Williams thought for a long moment, staring past the camera into the darkness of space visible through the station's observation port. "We're not fearless," she said finally. "We never were. We're afraid of a lot of things. The dark, the unknown, death, failure, all of it. But somewhere in our history, we learned that being afraid doesn't mean stopping. It means being careful, being prepared, being smart. And sometimes, it means walking straight into what terrifies you because that's where you need to go." She paused, her expression serious. Every species in the Council looks at the darkness and sees danger. They're not wrong. It is dangerous. It's hostile and cold and full of things that want to kill you. But humans look at the darkness and see something else too. We see space to move, territory to claim, an environment to master. We see another place to exist, another challenge to overcome, another victory waiting on the other side of fear. The interview ended there, but that final statement circulated through Council space for years afterward, quoted and analyzed and referenced in countless tactical discussions. Because it captured something fundamental that the original assessment had missed. The galaxy had assumed humans feared the dark and therefore would avoid it. They had been half right. Humans did fear the dark. They just never let that stop them from hunting in it. And once the galaxy understood that distinction, they began to understand what it meant to have humanity watching over the spaces between stars. The monsters under the bed were gone. The darkness was no longer empty. Something human was out there, patient and professional and absolutely unafraid of what the shadows held. Because they had learned long ago that the scariest thing in the dark was usually human. And that was exactly how they liked it.